Now, council tax takings have more than tripled in England since the turn of the century. Town halls have been raising more than £38.5 billion last year. That's what the latest analysis suggests. The research has been carried out by the Taxpayers Alliance campaign group and showed that takings had increased from £12.2 billion in 2000-2001 to £38.5 billion in the last year. Darwin Friend is head of research at the Tax Alliance. I think the first thing you might think, Darwin, and thank you for joining us, is paying more should mean better services.
Yeah, and firstly, thank you very much for having me on the show, Rosie. You would exactly think that, especially when it's gone up by that amount. As you mentioned, it's tripled since the year 2000, from 12.2 billion to 38.5 billion in the last year. Now, that's an increase of 214%. And I think taxpayers, frankly, are going to be outraged to see that they're handing over more and more of their money whilst basic services continue to crumble around them in their local areas.
So what's the corresponding figure, Darwin, for the decrease in government grants? And are your figures in allowing for inflation? Are they in real terms, or are those the absolute what's the phrase? The actual figures at the time?
Yeah, so in your first question, yeah, you're right to say, Michael, that grants have fallen. I believe the IFS did some research in 2020 which showed that government grants to local authorities had fallen by about 55%, I believe. But since then, they have actually gone up. And in terms of the figures that we released yesterday, it's in nominal terms, so it's not accounting for inflation. But when you do actually consider inflation, since 2000, inflation's gone up by about 135%. And as I mentioned, council tax has increased by 214%. So it's actually inflation busting. It's well over the amount of inflation that we've experienced in the economy since 2000.
But in increasing council tax, a lot of councils have had to, most of them, all of them probably, have had to increase their council tax, surely, but to make up for the fact that the government has reduced grants and has increasingly added responsibilities to the duties of local councils. And many councils, some Labour, some Conservative, can't cope. Some of them have gone bankrupt, some Labour, some Conservative, and they really are feeling the pinch, and the pinch in particular areas such as health and social care, which is, increasingly the largest chunk of their activity. And with an ageing population and extra responsibilities placed upon them, they cannot cope with the budgets that they're required to fill.
Yeah, and you might be right with that, Michael. You are right to say that they have experienced lower money from the central government. And I think what taxpayers would be sympathetic to paying more council tax for is if they thought that the services they were actually getting were worth it. But that's the issue, is that they're not getting that. They're experiencing basic functions of local government not functioning properly, such as potholes not being filled in, bin collections being missed. And I think what they see at the end of the day is their council taxes are going up and up and up every year by the maximum amount possible. And then you see councils, as you mentioned, actually going bankrupt, because what they've done, rather than actually fund those key services that local residents need, they've actually invested, for example, in risky commercial property, such as Woking Council did, which effectively meant that they then went bust as a result, and council tax is now going to have to go up by 20% as a result. And so I think what the local authorities need to be doing is, yes, they need to raise whatever revenue they need to do to deliver the services they need to, but they need to be delivering those to the best possible quality for the residents who are ultimately paying for them.
Yeah, and I think the councils want to do that, don't they? They want to provide a service that the residents who live in their constituency are really proud of. What other strands can councils use to pull on to raise money?
Well, one of the big areas is actually what I just mentioned, is the government back in 2011, I believe it was, Eric Pickles at the time recommended to local authorities to invest in commercial property so that then they had an extra revenue stream coming in, because they could then rent that out to businesses or to individuals to then raise money for themselves. The issue that we've actually seen as a result of that, and we did an investigation on this a few years ago, is that a lot of councils aren't doing the proper financial forecasting to put in place what they're expecting to receive as a yield as a result of that investment. And a majority of councils hadn't actually done that for property they've invested in. So I think it is a real revenue option to invest in commercial property, but they need to have the right processes in place so then they make sure that they're actually going to be gaining money from that, especially in current times as we're seeing office space being less and less used as a result of the pandemic and working from home.
Of course, the urging councils to invest in property is a huge risk, and some councils have taken those risks and it's gotten wrong. And of course, the other factor that happened with councils was this huge, in the case of Birmingham, this huge court case where it was found that they hadn't been paying men and women the right rates of pay, equal pay, and that's added a huge bill to Birmingham. But it seems to me the biggest problem is that central government, be it Labour or the Conservatives, have loaded more and more of the costs of local government onto local government, and it's come to the point where they can no longer cope. And that's why you're getting Conservative councils, well-run councils in many cases, nonetheless, they're just coming to the point where they're just feeling the pinch and they are on the verge of bankruptcy.
No, I do agree with you. And I don't think this is actually a party political thing at all. I think, as you mentioned, Conservative councils, Lib Dem, Labour, all forms of political parties running councils are facing this problem. And I think part of the potential solution to it has to be if the central government is actually going to be devolving responsibilities down to local government to do, because perhaps they're better placed to deal with these issues at a local level, then what they actually have to also do at the same time is start devolving some of that tax revenue, the tax raising powers, so that then they can raise the relevant revenues without it constantly having to come down to council tax and ultimately everyone having to pay more tax as a result.
Darwin, thank you so much for explaining really the intricacies of your latest research. Absolutely. Michael has scrutinised every single detail. Darwin Friend, Head of Research at the Tax Alliance.